Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie, and today we're going to be looking at Octavia Butler's book, Fledgling. I know this is an older novel, but I hadn't read it yet, and during Black History Month, I was like, I am going to prioritize more Black horror authors and sci-fi authors, fantasy authors, and I was like, Octavia Butler is the perfect place to start. So finally, I was able to get through Fledgling, and I wanted to talk to you about that today. So before I get into too much, if you are interested in dark, spooky horror novels, make sure to follow us on our socials at Dark Side of the Library. And we do have affiliate links in our show notes, so if you do happen to purchase a book, we do get a small commission from it, so thank you so much. It helps the podcast continue forward. All right, so who is Octavia Butler? If you've never read any of Octavia Butler's works, or if you're unfamiliar, Octavia Butler is a significant Black sci-fi author, and she did pass away in 2006, so I think about a year after she published Fledgling. Fledgling was her final book of her life. She probably wanted to write more, so it's really, really tragic the way that she passed away. But she was born in 1947 in California, and she ended up moving up to Washington, so up here, which is cool because in Fledgling, there's a lot of travel in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm like, hey, I know where this is, and it's cool. She describes some of the streets, and I'm like, I think I've been there. So that's a really fun thing. So she's very familiar with the Pacific Northwest, and she definitely puts that in her novels. Not only that, but she definitely tackles a lot of really tough themes in her novels. Some of the things she talks about is like human psychology, what it means to be human, breaking down humanity as a whole. But then she goes even further. She talks about things like race, gender identity, sexual expression, sex. She talks about important things like poverty, wealth, what communities look like, alternative communities, which is very, very prevalent in Fledgling. She talks about social hierarchies and what that looks like in one way, and she definitely tries to dismantle and criticize a lot of how we, especially Americans, our society, our hierarchies, what we think of as a pinnacle person and traveling all the way down. Butler is very, very pivotal to the Afrofuturism genre in general. I think probably her most famous novel is Kindred, which is I think on my list of books that I would love to read. I just need to make some time for it. She has a ton of other novels too, and some non-fiction books, anthologies. Just a lot of different things that she's written. Octavia Butler, her writing style can be described as bleak and stark, sometimes a little cold, which in some ways I think can be very powerful because it hits you differently and you're like, oh man, this is not okay, which might actually help us start to reflect on how these sci-fi themes apply to current day. So I'm really excited that I've finally read Fledgling and I want to read more of Octavia Butler. Anyway, let's get into Fledgling. Let me tell you what the summary of the story is, and then we'll get into my additional thoughts. So Octavia's final novel, Fledgling, is about a girl. Her name is Shori. She wakes up with amnesia in this cave in the darkness. She has these unhuman needs and these abilities which kind of lead her to believe that she is in fact a genetically modified vampire. She's 53 years old, but she looks like 10. I think that's what they say her age is, or 11. It's really young, but she's technically 53 in a 10-year-old's body. She's genetically modified because she has darker skin. She's got melanin, and most traditional vampires in Butler's world, they all have pale white skin. So in this book, Shori is mostly alone in discovering who she is, what her role is, what her family was like, while she is trying to regain her memories, or maybe just come to terms with the fact that she doesn't have any memories, and learning things from other people about her past and her former life. She also has to learn about who wanted and who still wants to destroy her and the people that she cares about, and how she can actually save herself. This book is it's an allegory, and it talks about racism, poverty, sexism, ignorance in general, and it talks about the beauty of human nature. Fledgling is a little difficult for me to break down because there's a lot of things that I'm still sitting with a little bit, and it feels like there's a lot of themes that were left unfinished or unexplained or didn't seem necessary or didn't really make sense for the book itself. And this is also coming from me who I really enjoy vampire novels. And the reason why I like vampire novels is that I like exploring it from an anthropological perspective. I like learning about how they would function in a world like ours where they're surrounded by food. The one thing I did love about Fledgling is the exploration of hierarchy, especially when we are learning about vampires, and Shori is driven by instinct. And even though that Shori and the Ina / vampires, so Butler calls the vampires Ina, even with that drive and instinct to feed, and it's clearly not the same as their human counterparts, they have a very established structure, and it functions, and logically it actually makes sense. So their saliva is basically a way for the Ina to get humans to submit to them, whether they want to or not, because it's like this drug-induced saliva that's going inside of your skin. So really, it's this chemical happening, and now humans feel this bond or this connection to the vampire, making them desire them more and to have them be fed on even further. So I like that connection because we're learning more about vampire lore. It's a cool connection there, and it makes sense. And it also makes sense as to why these vampires have created a community of food, but also a more of an emotional bond. But it's not necessarily that either, because technically the vampires are creating these bonds. They are a little like illusions because the saliva itself is that connection. So that's one of the things that Butler is talking about, is like consent, emotional connection. Is that a real connection? Even on the vampire side, if they were like, oh, I really care about this human, when you boil it down, it's food, right? So another thing for the social structure in Butler's world is we have the symbionts who can have their own families, their own lives. They can even go to work regularly. But they tend to have these communities where all of the symbionts are living together, kind of in the same neighborhood, same land, same whatever. And their Ina is there. They kind of rotate roles. So we're learning about different social structures and how that might look, and the hierarchy here. Clearly the Ina being the most powerful, the protector in this particular structure, and they have all of their symbionts. Symbionts also can't be shared necessarily among the other Ina that might also be living in the same community. So the Ina are separated between male and female Ina. They do not cohabitate together. So there's a lot of interesting history and stuff in there that I thought was great, and I would love that to have been explored a lot more. It talks about like the misconceptions of vampires and what really vampires are like, and I thought it made a lot of sense. So in addition to the hierarchy and learning about the vampires, I also enjoyed learning and seeing how Shori develops, and she becomes more, as a matter of fact, more wise. The more you can see her being more in that vampire realm too, like I felt like she was definitely more vampire than human for sure. even though she's technically half vampire, half human, she basically will tell her symbionts that this is just how it is, and you kind of have to get over it. In a lot of different cases in the story, which is interesting. Shori does come off as more as a matter of fact, like this is supposed to happen. And this is, I guess, a way to convey some of the power dynamics as well, which is a very interesting exploration in this whole thing, because one of the things that I did struggle with quite often in the book, and I think this was intentional, is that Shori is always, I mean, we are reminded constantly in a 10/11-year-old's body, even though she's 53, a 53-year-old vampire. I would have to have that as my motto. She's a 53-year-old vampire. She's a 53-year-old vampire. But there's a lot of uncomfortable moments, including some sexually explicit moments that were really just very hard to get through, especially between her first symbiont, Right, and her. So when in the beginning she first wakes up in the darkness and she has her first feed on an animal and she's wandering on the street, Right finds her and picks her up because she's this little girl wandering around, and he lets her bite him, but it becomes like this weird sexual connection very quickly. And that's apparently a thing too, where your first symbiont is kind of like one of your closest, and the whole thing was really uncomfortable. And to be perfectly honest, I had to look up why Octavia Butler had this, because it wasn't just a small thing. It was you were constantly reminded of her age. So this is an article I found in the Atlantic, some reason for Shori's age. So when I was talking about consent, there's so many levels here, and it's a good reminder for me at least to know that I do need to do some more reading as far as like history, especially when it comes to Black history, and how like these specific events and the context in Octavia Butler's books these are social commentaries, and I still have so much to learn. So what it says in this Atlantic article is, quote, Butler agitates conventional consent dynamics by rendering Shori, who initiates a physical relationship with Right, as a child. Shori's Blackness is relevant too. She learns that she is the product of a genetic experiment that combined Ina and human genes to give Ina, who are historically white, more melanin so they can roam during the daylight hours. As the scholar Habiba Ibrahim writes in her essay, Any Other Age Vampires and Oceanic Lifespans, Fledgling invites readers to consider the strangeness of how aging works for Black people. According to Ibrahim, age for the enslaved was arbitrary. Who was considered a child was at the discretion of enslavers trying to pack as many bodies as they could into a vessel. And Black adults could be infantilized in the same breath as Black children, especially girls, who were denied their youth, seen as predatory and hypersexual. I feel like that's such an interesting take here, and it helps me understand why Shori is that age, and if that is truly what is happening. Just reading that is like, it puts things into context, and it really truly is a horrible thing if you think more about this in depth. But Shori is seen as an outsider when it comes to her Ina community, except for those that were a part of her past originally. So we have a group of Ina, like a council. They're old, they're all white. Vampires are just known to be pale, white creatures. And Shori is this genetically modified vampire. I like that exploration as well, but I did think there was a lot of issues here. I thought Butler did such a good job talking about the systems and the hierarchies and the communities of the Ina and the symbionts and the connection there, and even the science and some of the manipulation and the learning about like emotional connections versus non-emotional all of those things. But then I felt like when we're trying to explore the genetic modification, the differences of Shori, and how basically Shori was a creation of making a vampire / Ina who's able to withstand the sunlight, because vampires in this world can't. They might heal up, They get blisters and everything in the sun, but they can't be out there for a prolonged time, or fire. But Shori, on the other hand, can. I don't know, maybe this is me being ignorant, but in my mind, you've got a species that lives a really, really long time. Humans, we live only so long. We have a very short lifespan. We forget history quite often. But if you've got a species that is kind of lurking and actually watching humanity, their food evolve, and they're trying to live amongst them, and maybe some of those humans become their symbionts, they might be able to see some of the flaws here, because humans are so unwilling to relook at their history and try to learn from their mistakes. I just thought it was really ignorant on the vampire side to be like, this is a monstrosity you've created, even though it would be a benefit to an entire species to explore that sort of thing. Granted, that's not the point of the novel. The point of the novel is to explore racism. But that's the problem, is that it didn't make sense. A lot of other things did, and then this was kind of thrown in there. And of course, I understand and see, and the prejudices and all of those experiences are clearly illustrated in this book, but it didn't make a lot of sense in the context of a vampire story, for me at least. There's also an entire storyline here where Shori is trying to find whoever is targeting her based on who she is. So I feel like that conflict of trying to find who is actually targeting Shori and trying to basically eliminate Shori or the people that she's associated with, that sometimes gets a little muddled, and it doesn't become very important towards, I would say, the latter part of the book. And then the book kind of devolves into this weird trial drama, which it didn't pull everything together. It almost felt like a bit of a red herring, and it went from teaching us about how communities and families and hierarchy and how things actually could look differently and what that might mean. And then it tried to go into, here's a metaphor about race, and then it just didn't come together fully. It just didn't feel like a cohesive story, and it kind of left me feeling unsure about the whole thing. One of the things, too, that I discovered was that this series, allegedly, there's some articles out there that have said that Fledgling was supposed to be the first of a couple of novels, maybe even a series of novels by Octavia Butler, which makes sense as far as how it ends the way it ends, because there's so much more we are left with that we're like, well, why is it like this? How does Shori live in this world? And what about her symbionts and the relationships that they've developed? And there's a lot of characters you do become very connected with, and you want to learn more about how Shori maybe makes a better world for the Ina. And now it makes perfect sense because of Butler's tragic passing. She wasn't maybe necessarily able to finish what she had in store for Shori, but there's talk of maybe a HBO series being made of Fledgling. I'm hoping they actually do a good job. They did pretty well with Interview of the Vampire, but again, we never know here. But there might be some more of Shori in the future, but it won't be from obviously Octavia Butler. But truly, this book for me is a platform and has helped me understand that I have so much learning to do, and there's so many stories out there from not just Black horror authors, but Black authors in general, and learning some of the social commentary and continuing forward and understanding these themes. And just seeing this from Octavia Butler's perspective is really profound for me. So I'm excited to explore more of her works. For instance, Kindred, that's going to be higher on my TBR list. So if this sounds like it's up your alley, or if you also want to just read a really unique vampire story that is a reflection of our current day society and a criticism of our current day society, I highly recommend checking out Fledgling. Give it a shot. Let me know what you think. If you are interested in other dark books, make sure to join us on our socials at Dark Side of the Library. We'd love to see you. And to follow, subscribe, etc. over here on YouTube and on your favorite listening app. We try to publish every Wednesday and Friday. Wednesdays, we usually have curated books for you. So all these new books that are coming out every single month. We haven't read them all quite yet, but hopefully we will. And then on Fridays, I usually do deep dives of books that I've read lately. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you all have a creeptastic weekend, and we'll see you next time.